Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, we have Chandler Stevens. Chandler is a really interesting guy. I was listening to him online, really liked a lot of what he was talking about the mix of embodiment, movement, strong movement background with coaching, personal growth, psychology, somatics. He's got a background in all kinds of things, which I'll let him lay out. I'm just really looking forward to speaking to him, actually. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for so long. Just the little exchanges on Facebook. I just keep thinking this guy's got some stuff. Yeah.
And this is going to be fun. And you're in Kentucky today, where you just moved to, you told me, right?
I just moved to, although I'm in a city in Kentucky. I'm not in the Boo-Foo, Kentucky.
The boondocks we might imagine when we think of Kentucky.
Your imagination's going to run wild, but I swear there's civilization here. So pretty nice.
I was looking up the podcast stats, and we actually get most of our hits are from like New York, Boulder, California, but Kentucky's in there in the top 10 actually. So,
really?
Yeah, I didn't know why. So some random people there. So I always start the same way. I ask people, how did you get interested in working with the body? What was your route into that, Chandler?
So the very first thing that got me, I guess, most involved in physical practice was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it was something in college where I just thought it sounded cool and maybe I could get a date out of it. I wanted to tap into the Bruce Lee vibe, but truthfully, it's the first time in my life where I ever felt very, in hindsight, it seems obvious, but very rooted, very confident in myself as a physical entity.
Yeah.
So not only was it great to build some muscle, do all the fun tricks, but knowing that I could physically hold my ground was a tremendous psychological milestone as well.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? I started doing martial arts at university at 18, and it was terrible for getting dates in terms of it was mostly around guys being terribly geeky.
It was all guys.
But what it was great for was wow, now this grounded sense of I'm in my body in a way that hadn't been before. And I can look after myself. And there's something kind of existential about that, which is
absolutely
really important and is actually very attractive, I think, in another way. So maybe it does help get dates in the long run, but not directly. So BJJ was your first kind of route into this stuff. And then how did that open up? How did that open up into, because, a lot of people do BJJ, they're maybe just wrestling, choking each other out. You've got it really into the personal growth side of things. So how did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I came to realize that more and more I just wanted to focus on body-oriented movement practice. I would do strength training, I would hit the barbell, that kind of stuff, just to get, absolute strength numbers up. But I realized I got the most enjoyment out of things like grappling, out of parkour, out of natural movement. And so the more I dove into that, I kept realizing that's the only place that I feel whole, is when I'm moving my body in what we would think of as, quote, natural ways, doing the things that human animals do. And I thought, well, golly, there's got to be something to that. And even though I'm feeling better physically overall, there were the injuries that came up, and I realized in hindsight, oh, those limitations aren't just physical things. I did all the physical corrective exercise, stretching, all the bullshit. And I realized oh, there might be an emotional side to this as well. And that led me into the somatic work, which led me into therapy, and just all of these things started to unfold as I just got curious about it.
Nice. So you just kind of kept following that thread. I mean, we've had on the show Joseph from Fighting Monkey and Rafe, he does the kind of tree climbing and all that.
Oh, yeah.
And so I know you're also big on kind of being out in, so it's about natural movement, running, wrestling, jumping, but also in nature, out in the natural world. That's a big thing for you, right?
That is, yeah. I have a huge personal affinity for the deep ecology movement. Environmentalism is a running theme throughout a lot of my work.
Do you want to say what deep ecology is, if that's a new term for people?
Yeah, new term. I would say it's the hopefully obvious realization that we are part of the world around us, that we aren't somehow this little isolated island. We are made of the same stuff as the rest of the world. And we have, if you let it, we have a very deep spiritual connection to the rest of the world. So that's deep ecology. And yeah, you mentioned Rafe and Joseph. I love those guys. Study with both of them before, and I'll be going back out to Fighting Monkey again here in the new year. But yeah, I think we have to look at divorcing ourselves from the natural context of the human animal has some pretty predictable consequences, both physical and psychological. And so in a lot of my work, it's how do we reconcile that and how do we mitigate those consequences? Because, coffee is nice and the internet is nice, but they have some drawbacks.
Yeah, well, I'm drinking coffee. We're both drinking coffee and looking at each other, sitting, watching the internet. And, it's like I'm with the movement guys, right? So it's definitely in the world an issue. So are you kind of coming from a kind of evolutionary point of view of like, hey, we evolved doing certain things and, we'd evolve not, for example, sitting in chairs a lot. We evolved not consuming, like I'm cut right down on my sugar recently. It's like, okay, that's probably not something that was in the diet of kind of prehistoric man a lot. So it's like, is that the kind of basic kind of frame coming from here?
Yeah, that's kind of the basic framework that I use to make sense of things. It just seems to make sense for me. So, it's looking at not like romanticizing the Tarzan lifestyle because, he probably had trench foot, let's be real.
Yeah.
So
you have 10 children that would have, died by now or something like that, yeah?
Exactly, yeah. And antibiotics are nice when you have a bacterial infection, but it's looking at how do we draw from the wisdom of traditional practices and adapt them for the modern world.
So paint me a picture of your life. Like, what are you doing day to day now? Are you coaching people one-on-one? You're doing movement workshops? Like, you're in the gym? Like, what are you doing day to day?
So in terms of professional life, most of my work is Skype based. When I'm with people in person, I prefer to be outside with them, even if it's freezing cold. It's like, well, that's the stress that's going to happen in life. Let's learn how to deal with it. So primarily it's Skype-based at this stage. I do run a few workshops from time to time. I have a teacher training program that I facilitate. And so in terms of day-to-day life, I like having time freedom. So I don't take on a huge number of people at any one time because I like to read and take long walks and just be still. I find that I'm not good at being me if I don't do those things. So I make those things non-negotiable.
I'm just going to jump in there because this is really live for me. Like, I'm realizing I had a really easy kind of time over Christmas and a really good rest, much to my wife's delight because I'm normally super busy. And then I've come back. We're recording this early January. It won't be out for a little while, but it's like really like just crammed my week full of stuff. And looking at my day, and it's like 12 hours of back-to-back things in my diary, And what I realized was, and that's pretty typical for me. And what I realized was like, wow, that in a way is disembodying because I'm like running to yoga even if yoga's like in there in my schedule, some movement. I got 2 yoga classes in my schedule a day. But it's like, and there's some walk there and walk back. So there's a bit of movement in that day, but just being that full, even with movement in that fullness is I don't know. It's like, it's hard to be human when you're that busy. And it's certainly like my ethics goes down just by getting a bit meaner to people. There's less time to stop and smell the roses and like aesthetically appreciate life and be intuitive and creative. It's like, and I was thinking of it and going, okay, one, I deliberately did this, right? But 2, like, that's just like almost everyone I work with. Like, I just got off the line with some Russian corporates. They're exactly the same. It's like that sort of fullness of schedule of being packed. I hope you don't mind me bringing my own stuff into this because this is, I just felt kind of like in awe of having kind of like long walks and things like that. And in many ways, I think that's quite atypical in the modern world. Like, not impossible. Like, I'm, wealthy enough that I could do that, yet somehow I don't. And I'm curious how it is that we live in this busy, busy world and the effect of that, and a world where we make ourselves busy.
Oh yeah. Well, and I totally feel like an anachronism. It's like, who the hell goes for long walks since Darwin? Um, and it's a tricky thing to balance, because on the one hand, I know that that's what makes me feel whole, but then on
Yeah.
the other, there's this almost compulsive drive to like do more, be more, make an impact. And I
Yeah.
know that to some degree, I'm probably sacrificing the impact I could make by carving out time to go walk in the woods. Like, I know that
Yeah.
you can get as much done in a day.
It's hard, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I know when I come back from retreat or come back from just hanging out over Christmas with my wife, like I'm way more creative. I'm way more like on purpose. I'm getting more done. I'm getting better work done, more to the point. So on the one hand, it's a false economy in it, in terms of rest and creativity and nature, albeit, I think of it all as part of the same thing. And on the other hand, there is, particularly in personal growth, which we'll get into, because I know you're big into this, and you're one of the people we've had on that's into that. There is this thing of like, make an impact on the world. Like, we're all supposed to fucking make an impact. Like my granddad was like an Irish fisherman, right? He wasn't like waking up in the morning and being like, I have to follow my purpose and live my dream. He was just,
what is my meaning? Yeah.
Just looking out the window going, I hope the weather's okay and I don't drown today. I'm fucking on a boat, So, you know what I mean? And then my dad's generation had a little bit of a sense that you could have meaning. And it feels like our generation are like, you have to have purpose. You have to have meaning. That's
yeah. We've got so much the basic shit covered that you open up the existential question of like, what the fuck good am I if I don't fulfill my purpose niche or something? And
it's also why modern life is wonderful, right? Like, we can sit here on Skype talking to some random dude in Britain or, Kentucky, and like talking shit and like deciding what to do in our evenings. Like, should I go to that yoga class or do I want to go dancing tonight? And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, we're spoiled little bastards. And but on the other hand, like, how luxurious is that to live with that? But it does open up, toilet paper wasn't invented until recently. That I had that thought the other day and it horrified me, and it's I love toilet paper. So it's like, modern life is brilliant, but on the other hand, like, we can get super busy even though we don't have to. I'm just talking out loud here, if you don't mind. Like, what's your take on all this busyness and this fullness that we find ourselves in?
It's a self-imposed prison to one I mean, it's a game, and we voluntarily buy into this game. And I'm speaking in the language of games because I'm rereading Finite and Infinite Games.
Oh yeah, nice classic.
Karst is brilliant, but it's like, we choose to deceive ourselves into thinking this is like the necessity that I have to fulfill the purpose of my role in order to be worth anything. And it's like, you could go through, I look at awareness the same way. You could live your whole damn life without tuning into fucking anything. And like, you're going to live and die. And, if that's what matters to you, then you win. Like, there's no objective metric of how to do it best. And like, you've got a 12-hour day and I'm doing at a couple of calls and then this, and then that's all the work I want to do today. But like, we don't know until we each kick the bucket who
did I waste my time?
Did I waste my time? I don't know. And
some days I see the podcast, and we've recorded 52. I'm just using this as one example. We've recorded 52 episodes, and that's fantastic. That's 52 fantastic conversations with really cool people, helping the world, helping the field. Like, everyone wins. Like, everyone's winning there. Me, the listeners, the people on the podcast. And like, that wouldn't happen if I didn't have this like super driven way of doing things, But on the other hand, it's like, the best thing in the world is just fucking ice skating with my niece the other day,
Well, I should put all this in perspective on my end. So I just got back from 3 days totally off the grid in the woods. Like, Haley and I were freezing our asses off for our anniversary, like wood-fired stove, didn't know what time it was. So we came back and we're like, whoa, days are so long. What is time? Like, all of these stupid hippy-dippy questions, but it's like, you spend enough time divorced from the typical games and you ask these questions. But there is, you kind of have to light yourself on fire a bit to get to that point where you do have that freedom. Like, the last 4 years of coaching, it's like I came to the verge of killing myself trying to get all this stuff built up. And then, this year, the Soma School teacher training, like that might explode, which I don't know what I would do with myself if I had that much free time then. Like,
you know what? There is a certain investment up front, isn't there? And even now, just being, thinking of, kicking back with my wife over Christmas or whatever, it's like, okay, like this certain amount of investment that I've done. And maybe it's a certain thing that comes with age as well. Like the way, I'm realizing I can't work at 38, how I used to work at 28. It's even there's a difference. And I don't want to be working at 48 when I've got 2 kids, for example. I don't want to be working these kind of level days, So I think there is about responding to that. Let's talk about coaching a little bit, because this seems like one of your main things. I've heard some really smart stuff you've said around coaching, and you're the first coach we've had on. I know loads of life coaches because I teach loads of them, but we haven't actually had any life coaches on the podcast yet, because most of them aren't like super body people. So, for people out there, what is coaching as opposed to, say, teaching? And tell us about coaching.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that I got, classified with the life coach people, because I've never done a coach training. Like all of the coaching I do it's extracted from the movement work. And I just kind of like accidentally found my way into it. But I would say the distinction between coaching and teaching is teaching, I want to convey my way to you, for better or worse, because we need teachers. And there's a good way of doing most things. Coaching is, I want to help you find your way of being or doing. I got into it mostly because through somatic education and my experience in Gestalt therapy, I realized like you live your whole damn life in like this sea of subjectivity, and it probably behooves you to know what makes you happiest and what makes you most fulfilled and what makes you feel good, and to know how to intentionally bring more of that into your life. So through a lot of the embodiment work, the somatic work, it all comes down to awareness. You figure out what is, and then you can go from there. And it seems to be the exact same in the life coaching space. Figure out what the hell's going on and what you want and what you need to do to bridge that gap in your way of doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's something a bit confusing here, just for everyone out there, like in the nomenclature, because coaching originally comes from sports coaching. Like there was people that were looking at tennis and golf. Like there was a couple of books on tennis and one on golf, and people were saying like there was a different way that came from sports, which was rather than telling people the technique, right? It was like getting them to say, hey, how would it be if you tried shifting your grip with your club? Like getting them to experiments and work it out for themselves, which makes people own it a lot more, means they come up with their own creative solutions, has a certain humility, a certain humanistic kind of vibe to it that appeals to people. And then they took that into business coaching, executive coaching, and then, every other kind of coaching, parental coaching, whatever. But now it's really interesting. It's kind of coming full circle, because I see people like yourself who are kind of working with movement, but in a very kind of personal, growthy kind of way. It feels like the kind of coaching is being reinvented through sports, or in this case, movement again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I look at, movement's the vehicle that you interact with the world. So if you change the way you move, you change the way you interact with the world. And it just seems like an obvious parallel. So yeah, I want to reclaim life coaching,
So what are people coming to you like with problems? Is it physical stuff? Like they're saying, hey, I keep getting injured doing sports? Or is it more like, I want to achieve my goals, kind of life coaching kind of stuff? Like what are they coming to you with?
People come to me, I would say predominantly movement is still the main, like body stuff is still the main avenue. It's this stuff hurts. I've tried all this. Why the hell do I still feel broken? So we address, some of the physical limitations, joint function, the way you organize yourself, all of that. But then also, more and more, particularly the last couple of years, it's been teachers who say, I want to know how to do the stuff that you do with people. It seems pretty cool. And why do I feel unfulfilled when I have all this stuff that I thought I wanted? So it's an even mix of both. And I think for most of the people I work with at this stage, they're two symptoms of the same kind of disintegration, we could say.
Mm-hmm.
People come and they want connection. They want connection between the mind, body, whatever we mean by that. They want connection to the rest of their life. They want connection to some purpose. connection, I think, is the big driver at this point.
It's interesting because I see people even in a gym. Like I used to go to like LA Fitness, mainstream corporate gym, just because it was, they had weights and it was a place to lift weights. And you'd see people in there and they'd be going to their trainers and they'd be saying, look, I want to get fit. But what they're really saying is I want to change my life.
Yeah.
And also what I was seeing is like the coaches that were good at helping people get aerobically fit or build muscle or, get slim or whatever, were actually having to work emotionally, holistically, motivate people. So it was this very interesting place where there was potential transformation. I know sometimes felt a bit sad that the whole thing was orientated around losing weight or getting big muscles, So it's very cool, this movement world, which I wasn't aware of till a couple of years ago. And a crazy bunch of guys came to a course of mine in Holland, and they were doing like one-handed handstands and shit, And I'm like, who the fuck are these guys? And I said, what are you into? They're like, movement. And I'm like, yeah, but like what? Martial arts, dance? They're like movement. It's a thing now. There was Patel, and then it's Fighting Monkey and Rafe, and there's various people that it's now kind of a big thing now.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited by it. I think it's super cool because it seems to have a depth to it. It seems to have a nature connection to it. It seems to have a sort of sense of the psychological and the social, like the play aspects. It seems like it's got a lot more to it than like the traditional kind of reductionist Western gym.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and it breaks down a lot of the boxes. Like I can't tell you the number of like yoga teachers I've worked with who are like, I don't know that I can call what I do yoga classes now. And it's like, what do you call it? Movement, I guess, but is it really that different? Like Fighting Monkey is a great example because one of Yosef's and Linda's, like their main question is like, what came before all of this stuff? And I think that's such a rich avenue of inquiry. Like what came before we decided to put this movement on a rectangular piece of fucking foam and call it yoga?
Yeah.
Or what came before we had, quote, natural movement or CrossFit or jiu-jitsu or any of these? Like, what the hell were we doing back in the day?
It's interesting how limited we can get as well. Like the rectangular prison of a yoga mat can be so limiting. And I was in a class lunchtime today, actually, and the teacher got out chairs, needed some chair yoga. And just by adding a chair, there's like all these possibilities. And it's like, hang on a minute, we've got chairs around us all the time. And we're doing this thing, we're like leaning over the back of the chair. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen my niece do that on the couch, just leaning, how kids do, they like to lean over the back. Yeah. They do these big kind of back bends over this kind of like that, and it's like, you'd actually discover that if you were just playing like a kid on a couch, you would discover that, or on a park bench, you don't necessarily need to be taught that as a move.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's the beauty of something like, what parkour, for example, could bring into a lot of like the softer, I guess, movement disciplines is like, there's a way that you can creatively engage with the world around you. And the more you open yourself to that as an option, like the more fun life gets, first of all, but then the more resilient you are, the more able you are to literally roll with punches or literally, insert your cliche embodied linguistic metaphor here.
You can normally tell the movement people when you're on a train with them because they're like hanging off things, or everyone's doing some shit that you're embarrassed about as your friend. You're like, oh. And it does. We had Stephen Braybrook on, who's a guy who does a movement coaching guy, and he was talking about how like socially conditioned we are to move in certain ways. Even to stand the wrong way around and the wrong way in an elevator. To there's a park near me, and if you do anything other than walk on the path through the park, people look at you. And I'm like, there's trees, climb the trees. There's logs that you can like roll across. There's all kinds of shit there that you can play with if you've got half an imagination,
I've had the cops called on me numerous times.
The cops get called on you.
Crawling through the mud. People think you're on bath salts or something. And it's like, this is what you can do.
Yeah, that's fun. The cops get called on you while you're crawling through the mud. I'm imagining that. American cops aren't always so easy to explain such things to, in my experience either.
Oh Lord, no kidding.
What are you enjoying right now? Like, what's like as a practice? Like, what's really fun for you right now? Is there something that's kind of like hot for you right now?
What I keep coming back to is just like stillness, and that sounds so boring. But like really just being still and being consistent with that as a practice. And then for me, it's always just like walking around in the woods. Like those are the two kind of physical things that I always come back to. I am getting back into like another cycle of strength training just because like it's winter and why not put on some muscle? Sure. But in terms of like what's fun, shit, I don't know. Life's fun. Getting outside's fun. My theme of 2017 was like, open yourself to more connection, you idiot. And so I did that, and it feels really good to focus on being a human more than being like the role of a coach. That feels really nice.
Nice. So what do you want to talk about?
What do I want to talk about? I mean, we were talking about the personal development thing at some point, right?
Yeah, we can keep going with that. Like, is there anything you particularly find helpful for people in that field? Like, what's like kind of the thing you, like, for example, I was talking to someone about personal responsibility the other day, and it's like, okay, this is like the first thing I work with so many clients, because until they get this, we can't work together, you know? Like if they're in victim mode, we can't work together. There's a reason that's kind of like 101 on so many kind of personal growth courses.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything like that that's for you is just like, okay, this is just so essential that everyone, one size doesn't fit all, sure, but everyone needs some aspect of this thing?
Well, and yeah, so there's that. And the reason why I got into the coaching space is I got so fucking tired of writing articles about hip mobility. I was like, no one needs more information on how hips work.
Yeah.
You just need to look at the choices you're making as you live your damn life.
Yeah.
So I think the big things for people are like, what's obvious about what you're doing right now? And, you know, there's this Gestalt exercise where it's like, imagine there's a bird on the window still looking in at you. What does that bird see you doing? What does that bird see around you? Like, what do your actions actually reveal about your values? And if you don't love what that reveals, then change something. Like pick something that matters to you, like that really matters. And it's entirely subjective because what matters to you doesn't need to matter to me. And just make the choices that will lead you to be the person you want to be.
And here's what I like about what we just said, that the emphasis there is on what are you actually doing and what are you going to do. So it's very easy, isn't it, to be like, to put a lot of emphasis, and I see people do this, on what do you think and what do you feel? You know, I feel this, I think that, you know, this is my theory. It's like, no, shut up. Don't tell me your values. Like I always say with values, like show me your bank account details. Show me your diary. Then I'll tell you your values. Like how much time are you actually spending doing the things you say you value, right? Like that's what shows people's values, where they put their time, energy, money, attention, right?
Yeah,
and
where
then
you put your time and your cash.
Yeah. Like that's the kind of bottom line with it. You know, people say, oh, I value my family, but I haven't talked to my mom in a month. I'm like, okay, well, then you don't. Like it's simple.
Which is fine if you don't.
Which is okay, right? But let's be honest about what you're actually doing. And then that just the simplicity of what you just said of like, okay, do some other stuff. Like make some other choices. Spend your time in some other, like, you know, hey Mark, shut up and spend more time walking in the woods. Or, you know, hey Chandler, hey, spend more time doing whatever.
Yeah. It's, you know, the other thing that I'm thinking about in the kind of self-development space, and I was talking to my girlfriend about this last night, is so much of the self-help stuff just feels very saccharine. It's very like inspirational. It's very like manifest this and positive thinking that. And then I'm left with the question of like, but what the hell happens when you get cancer? Like, what do you do when you're surrounded with shit and chaos? And like, what do you do when you don't know what to do? That's like the big question I've been thinking about lately is like, when things are going great, that's great. But what do you do when they're not? What can you come back to when shit hits the fan? And there's this psychologist and lecturer I've been listening to named Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, no, I love him. I was talking about him with Ray for a little bit. I was listening to him today, actually, walking to yoga. And
God, he's got some, you know, people piss their pants about some of his things, but like, you know, stop crying and just like, again, look at the choices you're making. But he's got this whole lecture series on the biblical stories. And it's like, damn, that's a treasure trove of wisdom. Like, regardless of what your spiritual, religious orientation is, like, look at stuff that is old and still around and explore why it might still be around.
Yeah, it's he kind of takes apart the psychology of it. So he's not kind of preaching it as a Christian, is he? He's sort of looking at the psychology of it. And for example, he'll talk about the idea of sacrifice and, Abraham, and how actually sacrifice, for example, any exercise problem, like sacrifice, like right now I'm cutting down on sugar because I feel like that sacrifice of that pleasure in the short term is going to have a long-term benefit for me. That's the contract we make with the future. Every time we do an exercise program, every time we change our diet, again, we're recording this in January. This is the time of year people do this. And that's just one of the ideas, right? And what I love about that series as well is Western civilization is built on those ideas. So it doesn't matter, like I'm not a Christian, but that doesn't matter because our culture is built on these ideas. And to look at them through a kind of intelligent lens is certainly helpful.
Well, it just seems like, why wouldn't you want to know the implicit rules of the game that you've bought into? He lays out, just like you said, like the idea of sacrifice. He lays it out so clearly. And, we kind of intuitively know that. Like you and I just talked about how we put in a lot of work up front to give ourselves some time or money or whatever. It just seems really important to know the rules of the game that you want to play. Yeah. That goes without saying, hopefully.
And there is a humility to saying, look, it might actually be worth me reading the Bible and the Tao Te Ching and the kind of Upanishads. And there's actually something there that's pretty classic that's worth me looking at. And I might want to analyze it through a modern psychological lens, or, bring the kind of tools of the modern world to it, embodiment and everything else we're interested in. But not to be so arrogant as to be like, well, I can reinvent this. I'm an addict. I'm 10 years sober. And like the absolute enemy of sobriety is I can do this on my own. I don't need anyone else. I don't need any higher power. I don't need a group. I don't need a system. Fuck you. I can do it on my own. And it's just in addiction, people have to be really beaten before they give that up. Like you have to be really 10 times convinced that you can't, if you're as arrogant as me, and most addicts are. And it's like, okay, you put your hands up, but I still have to repeatedly do that if I'm going to survive, literally survive. I have to repeatedly go, you know what? Hands up. I haven't got this. I'm not got this one on my own. I need to talk about connection. To me, it seems like that's the primary thing with addiction is connecting to self. How do I actually feel? Connecting to a group of people, a community that can hold me into account, connecting to some kind of a system, because I can't trust my own fucking rules that I make up, because my rules would be like, hey, why don't you drink fucking 8 pints of beer again, And then like, that's a good idea. And connecting to some kind of nature, some kind of, spirituality, meaning, higher power. Because if in a way, being an addict is a great gift, because it's like, if I don't do that, I die. Like I die within a year. That's the deal. Within a few months, my life's ruined, and I've seen that with my friends. I've been to the funerals. So it's like, I don't have to be convinced about that anymore. But in a way, that's just a slightly more extreme version of the sort of disconnected malady of life, right? Like the disconnected malady of modern life is to not have time to walk in the woods, or to not know who your neighbors are, or whatever.
Well, and maybe that's another... I look at, in the personal development space, we're driven to like make this impact and fulfill our niche and our purpose. And it's like, you can't do that unless you take care of yourself. Like you can't go out and conquer new lands or whatever unless you're like really solid on the home front. Like self-care seems like it should be non-negotiable if you want to be an effective human being in the world. And yet we look at it as optional. Like we look at movement as optional. We look at reflection and presence as optional. It's like, no, that's how you become a person. Like that's square one. Yeah. But most people don't even make it to square one.
That's how I teach when I teach in a corporation. I'll just draw a pyramid with 3 blocks and I'll say, look, that's what you do. That's your job. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. That's the relationships. That's what it's based upon. And I can help you with that. And that's the sense of knowing yourself, self-awareness, health, but also emotion, spirituality. I can help you with that because the relationships are built on that. And the work is built on the relationships, right? Like if me and you, I want you to be on a podcast, but if I'm just an asshole to you, that's not going to happen, right? So and if I'm not going to be an asshole to you, I need to have had a good night's sleep.
Like these are just basic, you know, and done the exercise, sobriety, all the rest of it. So it's like, that's a very obvious pyramid to me. And yet I need to continuously remind myself of that. And, you know, that's the main thing I'm working with others, is to say, look, you need, this is built, whatever you do, it is built upon these things.
Yeah. How the hell do we get so distracted from like fundamental stuff?
Do you think there's a risk also here? And I see two risks that I see. Like, one is people do so much of the I, they forget the it entirely. Like there's this sort of navel gazing, disappearing up your own ass on 3-year retreats kind of thing, you know. Like that's a real risk that I see. And I've definitely spent periods of my life doing that. Like when I was a, live-in Aikido student, I wasn't used to the world. Like I wasn't contributing. I was just doing my own personal growth, which eventually, had some fruition. But, I certainly could have got trapped forever in that. And then the other way is like, well, I'm going to fix the world without looking at myself. Like, it's hard enough for me to run my own health, not to put on weight, business, sobriety, have a decent marriage, maybe look after my sister a little bit at the weekend because she's having a tough patch right now. And it's like, that is pretty hardcore. And I'm someone who's smart, educated, healthy. Do you know what I mean? The idea that, like, the arrogance of like, actually I know what's right for the whole world or the government or I'm going to do my civic duty and vote and all that. But it's like, I just look at the idea that I can take care of much more than that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's almost a superhuman job, just to have a marriage and a family and a business to run and not get fat. Like that's enough, right?
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is like, we think like, I'm going to go change the world, but not everybody, of course, but let's just say everybody else in the world is thinking the same thing. So just like washing away in the infinite subjectivity of things, it's like, how do I make the world better than you make the world? Again, we don't know until the end, but it's like there are very obvious things that could be made a little bit better. And I think that's the place where it seems like you got to focus. Like, until you can get yourself pretty stable, don't fucking worry about the rest of the world.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson's fun thing, isn't it, is clean your room. He's working a lot with like young students. They're worried about changing the world, and he's like, clean up your room. And like sometimes I notice that makes a difference. Like you can see that ball in the background. That was like lying. I've got one of these exercise balls. I was experimenting with it and sitting on it for a bit, and it was sitting unblown up in my kitchen for 2 months, like saggily half blown up with some, like curry that got spilt on it. And for 2 months, it was just sitting there. And I was like, okay, Mark, before you like go back to work after New Year's, maybe clean up the curry stained piece of plastic in your kitchen. There's a place to start, right? Like there's something I can take care of today. So starting at home seems to be the place.
Well, and I just finished reading. Jung wrote the Undiscovered Self, I think it was, and it's something about like, I mean, the core thesis is like all the shit you project out on the world, of course, that's your own internal schism. And I think like the clean your room bit reflects that. Like all of the chaos that you see out there, it's probably just the shit in your own self that you haven't sorted out yet, which isn't a new idea. And yet we continuously like rediscover and redevelop in all of this. And it's like, come home to yourself and sort yourself out. And life just gets better. Like you're back in Tao, if that's the way you want to think of it.
And, it seems in the States right now, things are pretty divided. I mean, they're divided in Europe. We've got a kind of re-emergent kind of far right and a re-emergent hard left, like almost like communist hard left. And the similar in the States, it was almost Bernie Sanders versus Trump, right? And it strikes me that things there are very extreme, very divisive. I just had a friend kind of unfriend me, not just in Facebook, but really like properly, like, whoa, we're not talking anymore because I said something politically they didn't like. And that has started happening more often. And I don't feel like I'm expressing like, really hardcore opinions. Like center left and center right is kind of my kind of scale between those two things on different issues. And it seems like the sort of there's an extreme kind of schizophrenic divide that the world has, but the States particularly. Is that kind of a fair reading? I haven't been out to the States for a couple of years.
Oh, that's totally fair. Yeah. And the big thing is like there's a lack of nuance. And it is, it's a lot easier to demonize half the damn country than to think like you might be the evil that you think is out there.
Yeah.
It's a lot more comfortable. Maybe not easy.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more comfortable to think that it's out there. But then, the political rhetoric around the election was crazy, where you look at like Clinton said half the country's a bunch of deplorables. It's like, well, you just damned half the country that you plan to run. What the hell do you think is going to come from that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of hold that people can't be 100% wrong. Like, I mean, there are a few people in the world who are just, for want of a better word, evil, really looking to hurt people. But most people aren't really looking to hurt people. They have their worldview, which is different from mine. They have their own embodiment, which is typologically different from mine, perhaps, their own history. And even if, they're not so well educated or they come from a different point of view, they can't be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Seems like that kind of nuance is quite difficult because it's either you're with us or against us. There's this, and the morality of being mixed in with this in a new way. Like if you don't believe certain things, you're now a bad person. Like I express various views around gender, sexuality, and it's not. Some of my friends are like, well, I disagree with you, but that's cool. I'm like, cool, no problem. Let's discuss it, or let's not discuss it. Let's just fucking do yoga. That's fine too. Yeah. And then either way, I'm cool. But it's like, but I've noticed a small group that's becoming bigger. Of not only are we not going to discuss it, but you're wrong.
You're wrong
as a person. Bad. Yeah, but like bad and wrong, not just wrong like I disagree with your stance on this, but you're a bad person to have a different stance from me. And now my only job is to exterminate you. Whether it's getting deplatformed, which has happened to me or whatever. And it's like the debate is gone at that point. Also, people can justify being good human beings with that mindset, because when it's like, okay, I'm dealing with just evil and I have to kind of exterminate it, at that point the other's no longer human. So it's like anything can be justified.
Well, and so much of that seems to stem from the fact that like people are so fucking fragile, like psychologically fragile, physically fragile. And so of course you want to build up comfort. Walls are very comfortable. And like like you said, you're in Russia, you can be an asshole without people crying. It's like,
I said this just before we came on. People didn't hear that. I said, I've just done a deal in Russia. I said, what do you like about Russia? I think I said, I like Russia because I can be an asshole and people don't cry. Now, it's not an excuse to be an asshole. It's just that I'm getting tired of the level of sensitivity I'm around in Britain. And as far as I can tell, the sort of liberal version of the States is way worse. And certainly in Scandinavian countries, Holland, Germany, there's, it's not just Britain. And there's a level of sensitivity. I had an argument with a millennial friend of mine recently, and I said, look, can I be brutally honest with you? She's like, yeah, I'm into authenticity. And I'm like, okay, I find your generation comically weak. And actually, if the case this person's listening, I really like this person. I think they're cool and they've got a hell of a lot going for them. So shout out to that person if they're listening. But really, like, my assessment of the generation was comically weak. And that's going to sound harsh, but it's kind of like, it's almost like, and maybe I'm just getting old and cantankerous and it's like kids today, but it's, I don't know. There seems to have been a weakening through the generations. Like if my granddad's like, on ships that are being shot at by German U-boats working in a boiler room, my dad's kind of like, a bit softer, but he accidentally puts a nail through his fucking hand doing some DIY and is like, I'm not going to go to the doctors. And my mum has to scream at him to get to the doctors. There's a comedian does a sketch on the same thing. The exact same thing happened in my family. And, my generation, it's like, okay, well, we're still a bunch of pussies compared to my granddad's generation, but, we've done some martial arts. There's a certain robustness there. I'm not, I didn't have to tell you my safe words before this interview. I'm not going to get triggered by, there's almost nothing you can say that is going to trigger me to the point where I'd have to stop this interview, for example.
Then it's like a shutdown.
I really disagree with, but I'm not going to be like, well, I can't talk now. There's just not, I just can't even imagine what you could say that would do that. And that's not the case with the younger generation at all. And I've experienced that by being friends saying, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. I don't want to work with you. And I'm like, And we're not talking for abuse. We're not talking about extreme shit here. It's just like a misplaced word, or I had a bad day and I snapped at someone, or, small stuff. And like, what's going on with that level of sensitivity? Or am I just becoming an cantankerous old man?
Well, no, I think you're spot on. People perceive discomfort of any kind as an existential threat. And it's like, yeah, if you're threatened, you're going to revert. Like, that's how our nervous systems function. That's how societies function. Like, when there's a perceived threat, shit reverts to what is older and time tested. Fight, flight, freeze, like democracy becomes...
That level of threat has gone down, down, down. So for my granddad, it might have been the German U-boat. For my dad, it might have been someone trying to mug him. And, for me, it might be like, I don't know, a dirty look. But now it's even the thought of a dirty look. It seems like that stimulus that takes people into the physiological kind of kill or be killed fight flight mode has got smaller and smaller. My first experience is actually, I was at a dojo at Aikido school in California 10 years ago. And California is normally a bit ahead of the curve. And I remember it being slightly colder than was comfortable. And this was basically, I remember, a room for martial artists. And it was my job to look after the room. And I thought, well, there are a bunch of martial artists. We're all going to be moving soon. I won't put the fire on. There's no real need because, it's only slightly. It's a Californian winter, it's not going to kill anyone. And people complained, just person after person complained to me. And I was like, it's slightly uncomfortable and you're a martial artist. And that level of sensitivity I've since seen infect the rest of the world. I'm teaching courses and just trying to get the temperature, and just use that as an example.
Yeah.
People saying, I'm a tiny bit too hot or a tiny bit too cold. And just really having to keep the temperature exactly right, or else we get complaints. And it's like, put on a fucking jumper, open a window yourself. It's okay. And that definitely seems to have changed, that mild discomfort has become sort of somehow unbearable. And the other piece I see with that as well is other people thinking other people are responsible for their own embodied emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, Chandler, I'm upset. It's, you upset me.
You made me upset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got an upset, Chandler, and that's your fault. And you have to change your behavior now.
Yeah.
I don't like ginger beards.
Yeah. I don't like that you called me ginger beard because I'm blonde. And damn it goes in that way. I can't help it. This is over.
We're done. The interview's over. We'll never be friends. We'll never work together. And that's only a slight exaggeration of some of the situations I've found.
Well, and I feel like I got to interject and say, this is all, I find this very amusing because I'm 26. I'm a millennial. Yeah. And I look around at the rest of the millennial, and it's like, no fucking wonder other generations are pissed off at us. It's a bunch of crybabies. And
why are they so weak then? Because I think weak is the word I'm going to use. I'm going to get complaints about this. I can see people bitching about this already. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're getting upset and you think it's my fault, that's what I'm fucking talking about. Okay. Why is it that there's a sort of weakness there? I mean, life has suddenly got loads easier. I mean, it was always been relatively easy since, I guess, the 50s. So, I mean...
Well, so I can only speak to my experience of it, and I was very weak for most of my life. Reason being that I was an only child. I was kind of a golden boy. I had about the easiest go of things you can have, upper middle class, white, heteronormative, all of the labels that you lump all the privilege on. I had them. Great. So I didn't have to. I had no dragons to go slay. Yeah. I had no challenge to rise against. And so I was weak, physically weak, sure, but fortitude weak as well. Until I decided to I studied environmental science. I went and got a job at the Environmental Protection Agency. And it wasn't until I quit that and had to light myself on fire to make business work. That's when I really learned. That's the first time that I struggled. And that was maybe 5 years ago at most.
And you can get to fairly old without having to do that. I mean, for me, I guess it was the martial arts. I would have fit into the category of everything I'm bitching about now, ironically, if it wasn't for some really hard martial arts training. I had interviewed a guy called Phil Smith, who is one of my teachers. We talk about sort of training that's a little bit kamikaze and that kind of hard training. And for other people, it's running a business. For some of my friends who had kids early, it was like that's what got them up, because they were just just sleep deprived, and they didn't have an option. They got a kid to feed, and for me, running a business was another thing. But it feels like unless you could get quite old these days and not have children, not have a business, if you're not studying some real discipline art, and I'm not talking about doing hatha yoga once a week, but like some really tough training in parkour or martial arts or ballet even, I'm not snobby about what it is. Actually, ballet, definitely. But it feels like without that, you're not going to get that from life anymore. It's not like my granddad's on a fishing boat outside of Cork and he's getting up at 5 and it's cold. And he thinks that getting shot at in World War II is the sort of nice way out of that, So do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, maybe I'm idealizing the past, because I also want to give the present day its due and just say, and actually let's give this generation its due as well. Like the cool thing about you guys, I actually thought you were a bit older, but you guys, is that you've just been exposed to so much cool stuff. Like the level of knowledge of the young people that come to my seminars, like there's a few young embodied yoga principles teachers that I'm working with. And like, I think Lucy, who I spoke to today, I'll big up Lucy. She does PR for me. She's second generation yoga teacher. So like she grew up with her mum teaching yoga. Super smart, beautiful, feminist in a good way. Just you know what I mean? Just really cool, smart, love to work with her, love her as a student, brilliant human being to be around. And it's like, I was like, shit, when I was 25, I was just like a drunk, she's running a little PR business and traveling around the world and, doing stuff on a laptop and, and it's like, I also see kind of people who are just a level of together and a level of like just having so much available to them and actually making really good use of it. So I kind of want to acknowledge that as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing where you can't get too bogged down in idealizing like Tarzan ancestral lifestyle, because like if you have an internet connection, you can actually make a massive impact on things.
And you're doing Skype coaching, right? That's one of your main, not only are people listening to this podcast, which is being made for next to nothing, it's like you're doing Skype coaching. I'm doing internet marketing for a thing I'm teaching in Holland next week, because fucking Brexit hasn't kicked in just yet. I can still do that. But the business is fucking going down the drain if that happens. But, like there are all these opportunities available to us. How about this? If we're on the topic then, because I've had a few experiences lately, kind of like odd communication with millennials, like the ghosting thing. Like, I don't know about this. If you date in the modern world, or even like in a friend context, people can just disappear. And there's a way in which it seems like another human being can be treated as the sort of Tinder generation, as a disposable commodity.
Yeah.
That doesn't, as one of my friends said, younger friends, they said, look, people don't really exist to me until I meet them. And even when I've met them, they're still just a thing on my phone. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
I've had some young guys at the university talking about Tinder like it was a game and they were winning a game. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is a game. It's dating. It's cool. You're 18. Don't take it too seriously. But you do get that's a human being, right?
That's a person. Yeah.
And they're like, I'm going to troll them and say this funny thing. I'm like, you do get that's a real human being there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like the troll phenomena, like all these different things. It feels like, on the one hand, there's this incredible sensitivity, which is good and bad, as we've discussed. But then there's also this insensitivity. There's also this sense of like, you're just pixels. You're not really a human being, Chandler. You're just an internet opportunity to me.
I'm just a face on a screen, or a person you follow on Instagram or something. It's like, the ghosting thing in particular, that's the millennial thing, I imagine. And
disappearing, for people that don't know what that is, it's someone disappears without a trace, maybe after you've dated and just doesn't even...
It would be like Mark and I super hit it off, and I start texting him and he texts me back once, and then like he never texts me back again, and I'm left feeling like I'm a shitty vacuum of a human.
Disposable human.
Yeah. So, I look at it as like, it's really easy to not value another human when you don't know your own worth as well. Like,
okay.
Vulnerability is scary. And if you don't have the sense of self to open up to a connection and risk something, you're probably going to shut down that potential connection, or you're going to close off the ability to have a worthwhile connection with that person. You'll run away from that risk.
That's a really good point. So there's the self-worth piece. And I think there's also the practice of difficult conversations, right? Because it's been pointed out that if you have a mobile phone when you're running around and you get into an argument with your friends, you can always pick up the phone and call your mum, which wasn't an option for me as a kid. We didn't have mobile phones, to call our mum. We're on our bikes 2 miles away from home kind of thing. So like that was one, and for example, a millennial friend was angry at me recently and I said, well, let's have a conversation on the phone. Mm-hmm. They texted me about it. I said, well, let's have a phone. And they were shocked at this idea that we would talk about it. And it was obviously deeply, and to their credit, again, they had the conversation and they were really smart and articulate, but it was like obviously very uncomfortable for them to talk about this difficult emotional type situation without the intervening medium of a Facebook or a Twitter or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like they'd had a lot less practice than I had by their age. I think they were 20, than I had by their age at having those hard, like restorative conversations or intimate, vulnerable conversations. Or do you know what, those conversations that aren't so easy?
Yeah. People have a hard time owning the depth of their emotions, good or bad, I guess. And so I met Haley. We just had our anniversary yesterday, but like we met on Bumble, one of those little swiping app things. And we text back and forth a bit. And then at some point I'm like, hey, it'd be kind of cool if we like talked on the phone like people. And it's like a weird threshold.
Yeah.
Like, how long do we text? Are you worth talking to on the phone? And it's like, what would happen if you could just open up and see that like literally every other human being in the world has infinite potential, or call it the touch of God, or call it whatever you want. But like people have inherent worth and dignity, and they're capable of a lot if you invite them into that capability.
Yeah, that's nice. That's positive. I mean, do you think, as I've got you as a representative of your generation here, young man, I think you're the youngest person found in the podcast, which is really cool, actually. Do you think there are any other differences in relation to the body and embodiment? Like porn is a big one that I've seen that's like quite different. Like when I've had lovers who are quite, 20 years old, it seems like porn has given them a very different relationship to the body. And I'm told guys are way worse than girls on that. So that's one that I can think of. I mean, are there any other sort of body different relationships to the body?
God, I'll just draw from my own experience. I had a lot of like sexual issues. That's what led me into the Gestalt work. Was I came up across like issues around masculinity and expressiveness and sexuality, where I was like, yeah, what the hell does it mean to be a man who has a body? And like, I don't want to fuck my way through the world. Yeah. But like, you got to strike a balance. And there's such a body disconnect. And I don't think you can actually have, I don't know, but I don't think you can have a full emotional relationship unless you are fully physically embodied, or at least working toward that path. Yeah. Like the porn thing's interesting. It's like, yeah, you can get the quick dopamine rush and rub one out in like 30 seconds online. If you look hard enough, you'll find something, I'm sure. Or you can sit with like sensual experience, which even as I say that, I sense internally like that feels weird for me to say, but like you can sit with sensual sensory experience and see what comes up from there. I spent 2 hours dancing with my wife last night at 5 Rhythms, pretty much just went as a sort of date. And it's, moving together, feeling, breathing together, building that kind of sensual sexual charge together. And it's just like that. If I compare that to like, masturbating in a hotel room on my own a few weeks before or whatever, I'm just like, just like, which of those do I really want to practice? Which of those do I really want to be a big part of my life? And I'm certainly very glad that my kind of sexuality was formed before internet porn, in terms of like, what that would have done to someone with an addictive personality. Nice. Yeah.
Lots to be said there, maybe. So I don't know, again, without being cantankerous old man, like, is there a case to be said that the millennials are a less embodied generation? Is that unfair? Because actually, people like Lucy, they're doing yoga, there's kind of like, into their bodies in a different way, maybe. But certainly even my wife, who's younger than me, there is this view of the body as an externalized image a lot more. Like she's big on like the Instagram and photos and how she looks and her appearance, and there's partly a gender difference there anyway that's always existed. But I think there's also an age difference, because I see young men having that same preoccupation. You know, young yoga teachers telling me how to take my selfies, and I'm like, really? You're really going to do this?
Well, I think you can go through the motions of a physical practice without being embodied. I think maybe more of us are more, at least in my generation, the one beneath me, they're maybe fucked. I don't know. But like my generation, maybe more physically active, but without the kind of conscious, intentional embodiment practice with it.
Yeah, so it's sort of more bodily, more physical, without being necessarily more embodied. That's perhaps the kind of thing, because it's, again, I think when there's so much emphasis on external appearance, whether it's in yoga or, you know, looking cool, doing the parkour video or whatever, I mean, how can you be really experiencing that when your friend's got an iPhone and he's holding you doing the parkour jumps or the Aikido move and you're trying to look cool? There's very little attention left to the internal experience, I would say, at that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think, I was just going to say, I think we see that a lot in yoga too, with like the yoga selfies. It's like, what's actually happening in your body as you do that pose and sharing for whatever.
Yeah. It's interesting. So the one, and also I like that kind of, you know, I was saying to my wife, like, actually you can really teach me something about this, because you know about image and you have a different sense of aesthetics. I actually think your generation, the one below, have got a much better sense of aesthetics in terms of like haircuts and dress sense. I mean, I might not like the skinny jeans, but like my generation is fucking more combat trousers and baggy jeans and t-shirts. And do you know what I mean? It's aesthetics. I want to keep saying positive things here. It seems like, on the other hand, because it's not so internally focused, there's an aesthetics that have come in a kind of positive way. Like people are just much better dressed now in the UK than even 5 years ago. And there's way more hairdressers and things. And I think that's a result of having the kind of attention on the outside. You know, there's potentially, you know, I'm not against aesthetics. There's potentially a positive there. And I wonder if some of the craziest stuff around identity, gender, identity politics, I wonder if, and this is pretty controversial, if some of that doesn't come from a slight body denialism as well. You know, like, I'm not my body. I'm whatever I think. If I want to identify as an attack helicopter, I can, because I'm not my body.
Yeah, that's like I've never thought of it that way, but now that you say, that's like the quintessential mind-body Cartesian split, is like, my mind thinks that I'm this, even though it's like, well, okay, but what, which again, that's probably triggering for some people, but like, you can't separate what you are. You are a body. Be that thing.
Yeah, that's at least part of the picture, right? And I totally get people may feel like, hey, I don't quite fit here, or something's up, or I'm not comfortable with this, or I don't feel like I want to be put in the normal boxes. Like that, I can totally get. And like, to totally deny the body as part of the reality of who we are. It's at least a part of it, surely, right? Like that is an embodied perspective. That's an aspect of our being, an aspect, not the defining one, in case people think we've gone to some sort of hardcore 1950s conservatism. But it's like, that is an aspect of who we are.
It's a part of you.
Yeah.
It's a pretty significant part of you. Yeah.
Well, now we've upset everyone. I think that's probably a good place to end it. I feel like I just maybe apologize to listeners. This one has been less about embodiment and more about two people that are getting bromantic, having a little kind of get to know each other bitching session. I don't know. I might call this episode Millennial Bitching. What do you think?
Millennial Bitching. I love it.
I feel like we've covered some good ground and also missed a lot of your good stuff. You're on some other really good podcasts, which I'd recommend to people on coaching. You know, you've got a lot of really, I'm someone that's really studied coaching for myself for years. I really enjoyed what you were saying and looking at, motivation. So I point people to that. If people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
If you Google Chandler Stevens, I'm probably the first 20 some results, but chandlerstevens.com. I'm on Facebook as well, on Instagram, because I'm a millennial.
I want to see the selfies there. I want to see the selfies. Do you do a duck face? If you could do a duck face for your next Instagram, I'd be really happy.
Oh, I totally will.
So chandlerstevens.com, there's some good results. I was just looking on there. You've got some good free resources and stuff on there. Nicely put together website. I appreciate that. Any final message about the body for our listeners, sir?
Tune into it. That shit is all you've got to count on. So yeah, make it count.
Thank you very much, you millennial scum.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.